totally booked.
Rock and roll!
Well, I think I'll leave you to your reading.
Little Hand says it's time to rock and roll.
Rock and roller!
We are totally booked.
Welcome back to Booked on Rock, the podcast for those about to read and rock. BookedOnRock.com, the website. You can follow the show on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Also get on the email list for all the latest episodes, videos, blogs, and more. You can find that at BookedOnRock.com. Martin Popoff is a returning guest. This time he's here to talk about his brand new book, AC/DC at 50. Martin pays tribute to AC/DC by examining 50 significant milestones in the band's history, from their early years to their rise to the top with Bon Scott. From the massive comeback with Brian Johnson right up to today, this book covers it all. Every page with on and offstage photos, gig posters, ticket stubs, and more. It is an epic tribute to one of the most influential bands in history. I put together a playlist of AC/DC covering the best tracks from the band, dating back to 1975's High Voltage right up until 2020, when the band released Power Up. It's on the show notes page, but first, here is Martin Popoff. Hey, Martin, welcome back to the podcast. Good to see you again.
Yes, absolutely, Eric. Looking forward to this.
50 years. Wow. 50 years. When did you jump on board with the AC/DC train? When did you first discover the band?
I definitely remember that because I was on one of these family vacations across the country. In the family van, the big green Dodge van. We'd stay sort of in hotels or camping sort of thing. So we had one of these. So I'm from BC, so we went across the country and back. I think to New York City at that time. Anyways, in Winnipeg, stopped at a Kelly's record store, and I remember seeing Let There Be Rock and looking at it and thinking, this looks kind of heavy. It doesn't look that heavy. They're not rocking out too hard in the front of this thing. There's a song with Boogie in it. I don't know if I like that, but I'll take a risk on this band. So that was in 77. And I believe I bought High Voltage at the same time. And then literally you continue on the family vacation, hope you don't warp the record on the week and a half, 2 weeks that you're away, and got back and played it and loved it. It was almost a case of with me and my buddies, it was more of a case of every song is heavy, but no songs are that heavy, right? So it's not Priest, it's not Rainbow, it's not Sabbath, but still pretty impressed that every single song was heavy. And I remember Rainbow Rising was the first record where every song was heavy. And now this one and the Sex Pistols album 77, I can't remember if it's before this or after this, but so that was the impression. And for a long time, yeah, definitely a favorite band, but a band that you kind of looked at as a bit stupid compared to your other favorite bands, but you loved them anyways.
AC/DC is probably the only band I think that just has been able to repeat that formula over and over again, and it's worked. Why fix what's not broken, I suppose, right?
Yeah, and there are obviously subtle differences along the way, and the deeper the fan you are, the more you'll notice those subtle differences. There's a fair bit of experimentation and stuff, but at the core of it, it's not a lot of difference in the arrangements. It's all guitar, bass, two guitars, bass, drums, vocals, basically, right? The odd bagpipe here and there, but that's about it. I don't think there's any keyboards anywhere. Maybe on the very first Australian, I don't know, I can't remember, but and obviously the two different vocalists. But so the arrangement is the same, and the other thing that always strikes you as the same is the Phil Rudd drum beat. So you get a drum beat that's often bass on 1 and 3 and snare on 2 and 4 and hi-hat and not much for fills and at various speeds. So yeah, that's the other thing that really strikes you as being there a lot.
Well, you have to highlight 50 milestones in this book, which I guess that's not so easy. I know Gary Graff did a book on Alice Cooper, 75 moments, Alice Cooper at 75, and he had struggles with that. And I can imagine with 50, you probably had some moments that you had to decide, do I want to leave this one in? Do I want to leave this one out? If I leave this in, I got to leave that out.
Yeah, I did a David Bowie at 75 as well. And the Alice Cooper is funny because I've often made the argument that I don't think anybody in the history of mankind has lived a fuller life than Alice Cooper. I mean, that guy, yeah, you could probably come up with 150 that Gary would have had to wrestle with for that. AC/DC is a funny one, though. I don't feel like it was that hard coming up with the 50. They're a very secretive band. Not much happens. There's not a lot of drama, you know, little bit of alcoholism or whatever. And then there's some deaths, definitely, but not a lot of drama along the way. What we do with these is we make sure that every studio album gets an entry for sure. And you know, I probably have entries for every live album. I think I do. And, you know, AC/DC famously didn't do greatest hits albums, but they kind of did, right? Box sets and whatnot. But no, it wasn't particularly hard. They had a lot of milestones along the way, and that's kind of cool too. So a lot of it is pretty upbeat and happy stuff. Probably a slightly larger proportion of that than in the Bowie book. The Bowie's a multimedia guy, and there's a lot of strange stuff going on there. But no, the AC/DC was pretty easy. That's the funnest part of the job, actually, for these books, is coming up with those 50, and then having a little negotiation with Dennis over at the publisher. You know, he's a smart music guy as well, so he might have the odd suggestion, you know, put this one in, take that one out. So usually there's a slush fund there of you know, 2 to 3 to 4 entries that we play with a little bit. And sometimes he says things like recently he's been saying, you know, don't pick an entry for going on a TV show or whatever, because the pictures are really hard to get sometimes. So he's thinking in that mind, because they do such an amazing job with the layouts of these books and the gorgeousness beautiful. and the photo, you know, the archival, the stuff that they put in, that he's always thinking a little bit with that photo hat on, like what are the pictures that are going to complement the thing. So that takes a little bit of a count into that as well.
The first milestone moment, titled Problem Child, it's the formation of AC/DC in Sydney, Australia. And this is a reminder that Bon Scott was not the first singer of the band. A guy by the name of Dave Evans was the first singer, but it wouldn't be long before Bon joined, right?
It gels pretty fast. Bon Scott comes in, you know, he's been in that band Fraternity. I think they had 2 records out. And, you know, there's a little bit of at the very beginning, there's a little bit of that embarrassing glam past and glam look to the band, but very quickly, I mean, they're all so young anyways, they very quickly figure it out. And famously, I guess the interesting thing about them not figuring out is that first Australian version of the High Voltage album is a fair bit of a departure, all told. You know, you don't really hear the AC/DC sound on there. You get a bit of that glam, you get an actual ballad, you get some kind of boogie woogie, you know, more 50s based stuff. By the time they get to the next album, they sort of get it figured out. But yeah, they're a little bit in flux for a short period of time. They're down in Australia.
I believe they did release a single or 2 with Dave Evans, or am I wrong about that? I think they did.
At least, yeah, the one, I think. Yeah, Can I Sit Next to You, Girl?
Yes, that's the one. Yeah.
They get some success with it, right? I mean, it's you know, it's funny, you look back on that Australian situation. It always looks, you know, I suppose rock stars say this now, even in North America, but it looked easy back then to actually get a little bit of notoriety or whatever. They just kind of fell into it, and they got on TV, and they were in the hit parade and all that kind of stuff. So it seemed kind of effortless for them to at least get noticed.
Milestone moment number 3 in the book is when Bon officially joins the band. There's a great picture of Bon with the Valentines. They're all dressed in red. It looks like a Motown group.
It's funny. He almost just willed his way into it in a certain way. It's in this kind of the same way David Lee Roth did into Van Halen. He's just like hanging around, you know, David Lee Roth giving him gear, saying, I got to be on stage, put me on stage. You know, he auditions earlier on in 71. So it's funny that he just like through force of personality gets himself into the band. And Bon kind of does that as well. Bon's a little older than them. He's a little taller than them. He doesn't quite fit the look of the other guys. But yet he gets in there, and yeah, he has this past, that Valentine's thing. It's almost like, you know, we talked about glam a little bit, but there's also, you know, back in those days, there was the matching costume idea. And there's, you know, you think of the Irish show band thing that happened in Ireland and that. So yeah, pretty embarrassing looking stuff. And then Fraternity and all that, you really hear him doing more of a singing thing. And then in AC/DC, he gets a little more of that vocal fry in there.
He's got a different look in Fraternity. There's some clips on YouTube. He had quite the background, which that was the story too, when just before he died, that he had thoughts of maybe trying some different things on his own, like maybe a country album or country rock album. I don't know how much of that was true, but he did have quite a musical background, Bon Scott.
He's also got a little bit of the hard man thing going too, like the Melbourne, what are they called? The Melbourne Sharps, like he's got a little bit of in some AC/DC. It's quite fascinating. You can find in AC/DC in some of Bond's moves, you can see a little bit of this sharp dancing that the gangs did back then, kind of thing. And you wonder, where does he get that? And then you see these cool videos on YouTube about the gang scene in Melbourne and the specific haircut and all that, the way they would dance around. It's pretty interesting. So he had a bit of that background too.
There's a milestone in the book, stands out to me, number 12, AC/DC plays CBGB. When was this? And can you talk about why you chose this specific moment for the book? Because I thought this was interesting.
If I remember the story correctly, I think they played the Palladium that night. And then afterwards, they were still all hopped up on energy, and they went down and did CBGB, and they just bullied themselves onto stage and played and kind of converted the crowd. They all kind of liked what they were seeing. AC/DC, the neat thing about their music is the simplicity of it allows it to sound good under, less than perfect circumstances. It's not a wall of sound like a thrash double bass drum, guitar solos everywhere sort of thing that can sound muddy. I included it in there because it's a neat story on its own, but it also sort of sat in for the that interesting idea that for a brief moment there, you could have called them a punk band, and the label did in one or two ads or made them look a little punky or whatever, a little rough. But the fact of the matter is when everything's still in flux and there really is no, set way to be a punk band, you listen to this simple music and that growling guy, the voice on Bond. And, you could have said they were punk. AC/DC weren't having any of it. They basically hated that stuff and said, no, that's not us at all. We're a rock and roll band, that boring thing that they would say, or Lemmy would say about, Motorhead, right? We're a rock and roll band. But in AC/DC's case, it kind of was the case. They're like a heavy version of Chuck Berry, right?
And the look, they had that look to them, that snarl, especially Bond. He's somebody like a Johnny Lydon type you just didn't want to mess with.
Yeah, and they didn't dress up. They had the working man's look to them too, and the long. There was nothing fancy done to their hair, and it was just t-shirts and jeans, and they were small and scrawny kind of guys. Angus's thing, with the schoolboy outfit, that's not a whole lot different than Dave Vanian in his vampire look or whatever, right? I mean, there were punk bands that had these weird different looks, and what's more punk, a 13-year-old school kid is a punk. That's a definition of a punk too, right? So he looked punky as well.
Before we get to the band's commercial breakthrough in 1979, what are some of the albums that really stand out to you prior to that commercial breakthrough?
Well, my favorite AC/DC album is Power Age.
There you go. So many, I've heard so many say that.
Yeah, I love Power Age. I find it I find it like sort of charming and chummy and laid back and a little southerny. Certainly to me, Let There Be Rock is almost like their volume 4. There's something about it that sounds just a little harsh and angry and depressing to me. A lot of people love Let There Be Rock, but I just find that whatever they did different on Power Age, it just seemed a little sweeter. Famously Keith Richards loved the album as well, right? But yeah, so that's my favorite. Highway to Hell is my second favorite. Then I'd probably go Flick of the Switch, and then possibly Back in Black. But yeah, so they're not really making any inroads at this point, but they're on a major label the whole time. They're being properly distributed in Canada and the States and all that. But Power Age, and my fond memory of that is buying the red vinyl Canadian version downtown and having to bike it uphill 3 miles home on a super hot day, hoping strapped to the back of my bike that it wouldn't melt.
The good old days.
Yeah. But that still stands as my favorite.
Let's get to Highway to Hell, milestone number 15, no surprise. And originally Eddie Kramer was tapped to produce this. They had a falling out with him. Mutt Lange comes in. What was the problem with Eddie Kramer? And what was it that Mutt was able to do on this album that put AC/DC over the top?
I can't remember what the falling out is about. I have a feeling it's a little bit about just a clash of personalities. Eddie Kramer can be pretty, assertive. That might not have gone over well, but can't quite remember. Now, when it comes to Mutt, the interesting thing about Mutt at this point is he's not the big superstar yet. He doesn't even particularly have a sound. I don't. Well, I guess he eventually gets a sound, but he also gets a reputation for being a real taskmaster. He's on the way here, but he's not there yet. He's coming in. He was from South Africa. The early stuff he's done at this point. There's some City Boy. He's just a good producer. He's serious. He will make them work hard, but he's not super taskmaster Mutt at this point. So what he does for the band is he definitely applies the Mutt magic in terms of getting really good takes out of them, getting good vocals out of them, making sure the songs make sense. It doesn't sound anything like Back in Black sounds or For Those About to Rock. It's just a good, competent, proper, everything's in its place, but conservative, nothing eccentric about it at all. 70s recording. I don't know how much you would ascribe this to him, but it sounds like a much more professional band than you got on Power Age. Oddly, it sounds Power Age sounds less professional than Let There Be Rock in some senses, but this basically sounds more professional than both of those.
He's been known to take up to 3 years to make albums. Those are the stories, Mutt Lange. He doesn't like to do interviews. Have you ever interviewed Mutt Lange?
No, I've never interviewed him. That would be absolutely interesting.
Sure.
To interview him. He should, it'd be nice if he just puts it all out one day and just writes his own autobiography or something like that. And
that
goes
would,
through it. But
that'd be fantastic just to read his experiences. And I think Tony Platt, the engineer from Back in Black, is on Highway to Hell too. I think that was the team. And just as quickly as they're on top, finally on top with Bon, he's gone, dies February 19th, 1980. I've had Jesse Fink on this podcast to talk about his book, The Last Highway, and he says Bon didn't die from drinking too much that night and choking on his own vomit, that it was a heroin overdose. And you do cover this in the book. How much do you cover in this chapter? And from the information that you've taken in, what do you think happened?
All of these 50 highlights have to be written kind of like diamond hard and get in what you can get in. So it's a much longer story than I could afford myself in there. And there is a lot of mystery about it. There is the talk of the heroin thing. There is the talk of the choking on the vomit thing, which kind of makes sense too, because, there's a lot of detail about how he was found and like, stuffed down with his neck bent over in the console of the car and stuff. So, there's credence to all these things. There's people who were there and then disappeared. There's other people who, surprisingly partied with them that night, So there's a lot of weird little pieces to the story. I don't know much more to say about it than that, but I just remember writing that entry. It's like, how do I get as many of these details in as possible? But it was obviously a very strange night that took it, and then apparently how does that work? So I think somebody robs his apartment after they find out he's dead. Like a bunch of his stuff goes missing afterwards. Yeah. Someone who was there, the guy that found him, disappeared. They never saw him again. All this kind of stuff. Yeah.
There are fans who are adamant and they don't want to believe that it was heroin. And Jesse Fink said, to the point where he's gotten death threats from the book that he wrote. There are people that just did not want to believe that it was heroin. If it was, it happens. That's rock and roll. Is a lot of drugs going around in rock and roll, right?
Yeah. And how did that work? So I think there's also, there's this opinion about Bon that he just kind of wanted to make people happy too. So if there was going to be heroin involved or something, it's almost like he's just going to go along with it, but it's not really his thing, or just to be part of things. So I don't know. Yeah. There's a lot of strange dimensions to that story.
The well-known story that the band, with Bon's dad's blessing, got right back to work. I think it was within like a month or two, right, of Bon's passing. They're back in the studio.
Yeah, this band is they've always had a very professional attitude, circle the wagons, the show must go on kind of thing. They're take care of business, can do kind of guys. Having said that, they obviously took a long time between albums usually, but on the side, you've got a good problem to deal with, and that's you're just so famous, right? They're just such a big band. They've got a lot to deal with. The stakes are so high all the time, right? And then, the irony of the whole thing, which is really wild, is these albums become so important, yet they're so economical and simple. And so those guys are sitting there. You hear stories of them trying all these songs at different speeds, just jamming them over and over again, finding the right groove. That magic thing that happens between, Angus and Malcolm being just a little bit off. People talk about the guitar weave of Ron Wood and Keith Richards, that AC/DC kind of had that as well. So yeah, it's pretty interesting that they're building something on like a Steely Dan or a Queen level, or a Bohemian Rhapsody level in a way, but what they're building is a really simple thing. It's just incredibly meticulously done, yet ironically, it's just simple rock and roll.
A lot of guys considered before they picked Brian Johnson. The most interesting to me is Noddy Holder of Slade. He said that he turned it down because Slade was his band. He didn't want to leave them. That's pretty interesting.
Well, and Mark Storace from Crocus, his opinion at the time, and it made perfect sense, is that we were as big as AC/DC were, roughly around that time. And this was my band, and I loved my band, and we were doing, obviously they were doing similar kind of music, which is always funny to me too. You talk to the Crocus guys and why they sounded like that, and they said, we just loved this sound. We loved AC/DC and this sound. So that's, I guess we kind of fell into it. But so he was in a funny situation where oddly, it would have at the time looked sort of like a lateral career move.
The Booked on Rock podcast will return after this. Milestone number 18, Malcolm Young offers Brian Johnson the gig. And the stories that come out of Brian getting that job in the spring of 80 are great. You cover it in this chapter, and he initially turned down the audition.
Yeah, I mean, if I remember correctly, I mean, it's like he's quit the rock and roll business. The Geordie thing didn't work out. He'd been in that a long time, just banging his head against the wall and it not particularly working out. And he's back. I think he's running, what is it, a roofing company or some sort of, he's kind of his own boss in the trades, and just doesn't really consider the whole idea of going back to rock and roll. But obviously it worked out.
He said he was too old and couldn't afford the trip to London. And
right.
then, and this is in your book, the friend of his says, can you sing a jingle for this Hoover vacuum commercial? And the pay he got for it was 350 British pounds. That's enough for him to call back AC/DC's management and says, yeah, scratch that. I can go. And that commercial is on YouTube too. Have you ever heard that?
I think so. I don't remember it now, but
it's hilarious.
I'll have to go play that. And apparently, how does that work? So he shows up and he's just playing pool downstairs with the guys, and he's and it's like, well, you're supposed to be auditioning right now, and it's like, well, I'm in the building. I thought you called me or whatever. So it's kind of funny that he's just he's just there, but he's not there.
Yeah, what do you think about Brian Johnson? He just seems like the nicest guy, very unassuming, not a big ego.
Great choice, Newcastle guy, salt of the earth, funny guy, just cheerful guy. Yeah, absolutely down to earth. He looks the part. He's the right height and all that. He's got this great stage manner. One of the funny things is, you don't think of Back in Black as like a heavy metal album, but back then, it was a heavy metal album at the time. In 1980. That sounds pretty heavy at the music end, but something I've kind of learned over the years is that the importance of an extreme vocal in making you think something is heavy. And his vocals were actually more extreme than even Bon Scott's. I mean, he's even more of a shrieker and a screamer than Bon was. So you're actually getting a vocalist in that's even more extreme. And then at the music end, I wouldn't even say Back in Black is particularly less heavy than the old stuff. It's kind of the same level of heaviness. So, it's an interesting situation where, they're coming with a similar sort of music. Now, Mutt Lange's production is different as well. I think it's a little more fatter and warmer than it is on Highway to Hell. I think it's a little steelier, better highs on Highway to Hell, and this is a little bit more. It's got a nice bottom end to it, and a nice warmth to it. But yeah, when you think back, it's kind of interesting to think that that they're coming at you with the vocalist who's actually even more extreme than Bon Scott was.
Martin Popoff, new AC/DC book out, and it is a must-have for every fan of the band. AC/DC at 50. It was released on March 28th, so get your copy now. 1980s Back in Black, biggest of all AC/DC albums, one of the biggest selling albums of all time, period. The title track, You Shook Me All Night Long, to this day, played on radio and sports stadiums everywhere. Almost every song on that album still gets played on rock radio. So same question with Highway to Hell. What is it about this album that clearly connected with so many fans, not just AC/DC fans, just music fans?
I think the whole dramatic narrative of Bon's death, number one. Number two, Back in Black is just an irresistible toe-tapping slow song with a lot of spaces in it. You Shook Me All Night Long is like a Sweet Child of Mine, Southern rock, sort of up-tempo rock song. So that gave them that crossover appeal. And I think, well, so the thing is, it's an interesting concept where every record collection has to have that one or two records where the quote unquote normie, or the person who says, hey, what's your favorite music? I just listen to what's on the radio. That kind of person has to have a heavy album in their collection, right? So, you think of Motorhead, Ace of Spades as an extreme example, or maybe the Black Album. But this is one of those big early examples, right? Having this in your collection, it was like the one heavy metal album everybody who wasn't into heavy metal had to have, kind of thing. Other than that, I don't think the album cover, sold too many records. It's maybe it would have sold twice as many records with a better album cover, right? I mean, it's a dramatic, interesting album cover, but again, it speaks to the narrative. And then, as you get deeper into the song, Hell's Bells is a good dramatic song, right? But even that, you think of that, it's a heavy song with dark chord changes, but it's not particularly fast. There's nothing extreme about the recording. Even the guitar riff on it is just like a step above heavy Southern rock in a way. So it's not a particularly extreme album. It's just a good, accessible, heavy album. I suppose it has those touch tones of familiarity to old time rock and roll as well. That AC/DC is part of the tradition, but yeah, it's, if I were to sum up, I would say Back in Black and You Shook Me All Night Long are irresistible hits, and there was a big news story.
Malcolm Young, what are your thoughts on Malcolm as a songwriter? He contributed quite a bit.
Yeah, he's a big part of the writing. He's the boss of the band. He's also a lyric writer. So he's super important in there. He knows his role. He can play lead guitar too, but he chooses not to because he knows the value of an Angus in the band as well. Angus and him led together. I wouldn't say Malcolm's really the leader, but it's those two, well above anybody else. He's kind of he was kind of the business interface of the band. He'd be the front face of the band before you get to the accountants and the lawyers and the managers and the label. It would be more Malcolm than anybody. So yeah, super important guy. I got to interview him in person after the big Toronto, Molson Rock SARS Fest concert the next day in the hotel. Sweet guy, really nice guy. So that was great. That's one of the highlights of my, doing this rock critic thing was meeting and sitting down with Malcolm in a hotel room. But yeah, obviously, super, super crucial, the heart of AC/DC.
Just a little guy, him and Angus, right? Two little guys.
Oh yeah. And even when I was at that interview, Angus rolled through in the hallway, in his hotel white bathrobe with his little tray of tea, and
the tea.
Little guy. Malcolm was so skinny too, right?
Just
really little guy.
Yeah. What follows Back in Black is interesting because some hits, some misses along the way. and then we get to the comeback Razor's Edge. But the follow-up to Back in Black was 1981's For Those About to Rock. Wasn't a commercial failure, but it was received with mixed feelings among the fans and critics. The title track is a classic. Let's Get It Up is good too. But what are some of the reasons you cite in the book for it getting mixed reviews?
You know, when you think about it, I've never really thought about it this way, but you know, in the long view of history, you know, it obviously was a huge commercial success. You know, just not Back in Black level commercial success. But the main thing people remember is people were kind of ticked off at it. I remember as a kid, I was too. It just seemed like the songs were slower, plottier. The production was even more plush. Even the album cover art was bothersome, right? It's like, okay, well, you had the one simple cover. Now you got the kind of the same thing again. You know, it kind of looked similar, but you had the gold thing. So it looked, or copper, I suppose would be the name of that color. So you had this cover that it's like, oh, it's kind of upscale at the same time. So you're thinking AC/DC is just getting super famous and they're not your band anymore and all that stuff. But it was more so that the songs as a set seemed more laid back. It just didn't seem to have the bite or the slight badass quality, the hoodlum quality that you got a little bit with the previous album, and even more with the 70s stuff. So yeah, it just felt a little phoned in, a little lacking in excitement.
If not for the title track, probably would have fallen down the charts quickly, as did Flick of the Switch, because Flick of the Switch doesn't have any really big hit single on that. That's from 83. That was very raw, very raw.
Except I love that album. That's
Do you like
my
it?
favorite
Yeah.
of the whole Brian era.
Interesting.
I mean, to me, that's like they're badass again. That's literally the only album of the entire Brian years that feels like badass. It feels like they're outlaws. They're underdogs again. They're aggressive. It's heavy. You know, it's raw, but it's not that raw. It's not Black Sabbath Born Again raw or Venom raw or anything like that. It's just a little more distorted in the guitars. The guitar's a little more up front. There's some of the fidelities taken away from the bass drum, the bottom end. But yeah, I love the songs. It's heavy. It just seems like AC/DC being cool again.
From there, it gets polished, like Fly in the Walls, got that more polished sound to it. And then 86 was Who Made Who, the soundtrack to Maximum Overdrive, and the song Who Made Who. 1988, Blow Up Your Video, which was another one that had some different sounds with the production. What are your thoughts on that period of AC/DC? Those records, often forgotten.
Yeah, they didn't do that well. So they're going through the hair band phase of rock and roll and completely not participating in it. They're just going along being their same old charming AC/DC. I definitely like Fly in the Wall better than Blow Up Your Video. I really don't like Blow Up Your Video at all. Everything on that just seems forced. The wordplay seems cheesy. It's kind of weirdly muffled. It's got kind of a bit of a muffled sound, even though you know, it's Vanda Young is back. Both of them, yeah, I think so, yeah. But this is their nadir years. I mean, there's 3 albums in a row there that don't do that hot, and then they turn it all around for the Razor's Edge again, which is, like, as you said earlier, it's a big comeback for them. There
were lineup changes too. That's notable, right? No Phil Rudd. Right?
Yeah, you get Simon Wright in there, and I don't know if it makes things particularly better or worse. I don't think it makes a big difference. But then Chris Slade is in on Razor's Edge. But the big thing that happens on the drums on Razor's Edge, which would be a collaboration between Chris Slade and producer Bruce Fairbairn, I suppose, is that you get this really modern, tight, techie bass drum sound. Not quite Vinnie Paul from Pantera, but that sort of solitude, I suppose, or that sort of philosophy. But yeah, it's just you get this bright, snappy band again. The songs are better and tighter. There's Thunderstruck. There's Are You Ready? There's some differences. Massive improvement over Blow Up Your Video.
And we should mention too, because this is in your book as a milestone moment, Malcolm Young entering rehab. When he was having his difficulties with alcohol, the quality of the songs come down. As soon as he's back on his game, Razor's Edge.
Yeah, and he's out for a tour, but he's there for every album. So if you weren't watching closely, you wouldn't even notice, kind of thing. If you weren't, seeing the band live and all that stuff, it wasn't really talked about in the news a whole lot. So yeah, doesn't miss a beat. He's on every album, of course, until.
Among the iconic images of the band, along with Angus's schoolboy outfit, Brian's newsboy cap, and the cannon, is, of course, the bell. This is a great chapter. You devote a chapter to the bell, more specifically to the man who created it, Mike Milsom. What did he have to tell you about that legendary AC/DC?
Yeah,
bell?
that's pretty interesting. And by the way, just to clarify, when I said to the end with Malcolm, obviously, yeah, he's not on the last two. I mean, at the end, he's not there, but yeah, he's there all along the way. But yeah, so it's funny. After my last AC/DC book, which was AC/DC album by album with the same publisher, we did a series of these 5 books where, I would assemble a panel of experts, try to get some famous people, and we just go through every studio album in a Q&A sort of thing. So after that book came out, Mike just contacted me and told me all this great, cool history about the whole idea of the bell. And then all of a sudden, I've got another AC/DC book to do. I contacted him and said, hey, can we put this stuff in here? Do you got a picture? Blah, blah, blah. And he told me the whole history of making the bell, and, there being different bells and how they were hit and all this stuff. It's pretty interesting. So along the way, you get the bell, but earlier on you had the cannons. And then there's the story of Mark Storacci and Crocus were going to use the cannons, but AC/DC kind of took their idea. And then even before that, you've got April Wine with Stand Back and their cannon. And yeah, so you get these, and then you get the wrecking ball later on, sort of thing. So AC/DC has these interesting, iconic props that they pick up along the way.
They put out 1995's number 1 album, Ball Breaker, which you mentioned. That's where we get the
wrecking ball.
Brian swinging on the wrecking ball on that tour. Yeah, and that was their first number 1 since Back in Black. 2000, Stiff Upper Lip. 8 years later, they returned with Black Ice, another number 1. 2014's Rocker Bust, also number 1, but this is when Malcolm's health is in decline. Milestone Moment number 44 covers this and Phil Rudd's firing. And Phil was out due to legal issues that he was dealing with. Malcolm and Angus's nephew, Stevie Young, he's the one that filled in for Malcolm in 88 during the Blow Up Your Video tour, right?
Yep.
Stevie was there then. So now he comes back. As we know, AC/DC is very protective of any personal issues that go on. Had you been hearing anything off the record around that time that he had dementia?
Not particularly. But everybody kind of knew. There were the announcements. I mean, they weren't completely. I mean, they announced a little bit about this sort of thing. And I think Stevie is just a perfect choice. I mean, it's interesting that they've got this cousin who could be in it, and he had his band Starfighters. He's a legitimate rocker himself. But the thing that frustrates me about that whole era is I just really do not like the Rocker Bust album. I thought Black Ice was amazing, and I really like Power Up. But that album, for some reason, I remember hearing Play Ball and loving Play Ball and thinking, oh, what a great advanced single. This is going to be great. This is just a perfect AC/DC song. Nothing wrong with this. But then getting the album and going through it and it's like, don't like that one. Don't like that one. Don't like that one. That one's okay. And then you get to the end of it. It's a short album. Doesn't have a lot of songs. You don't like a lot of songs on it. Seems like it had a little bit of a weird distortion going on in the production as well. But yeah, it's kind of too bad, but I'm glad they bounced back with Power Up, because that's a good album. And I thought Black Ice was great. Black Ice is a funny one because you get a lot of people complaining about, and then you get into this weird debate about our album's too long. Albums shouldn't be this long. They should have took some songs off it or whatever. And then it's like, you can shoot back and say, well, why don't they just not make an album at all? Maybe that'll, if that's the logic you're after here, how about a 0-song AC/DC album? Would that make you feel better? So it's weird, this whole thing about, is an album too long? They should have left that off or whatever. The funny thing is, you sit a whole bunch of fans down in a room and they're all going to pick kind of different songs anyways. You might get a trend and you might find out that there's some filler, but really, somebody's going to like everything on it. So who knows what to leave off. So, and with them making albums so few and far between, it's like, give me all the AC/DC I can get.
I was just about to say that. Yeah. it's like, can't you just be appreciative of I'm always pleasantly so surprised and so happy to see when they come back, like with Power Up. Yeah. I mean, at that point you thought it's over, but it's not. That's what we're leading to here with milestone moment number 47. Brian plays his last show to date. His hearing problems forced him to bow out of the band's 2016 tour. Last show, February 28th, 2016, he was telling Eddie Trunk about how he got sick, then got on an airplane, and then the fluids in his ears crystallized.
Yeah, and then people have talked about, him being into racing, race cars, and that being too loud or whatever. And obviously playing with AC/DC is loud. So, it all sounds very legitimate. People were doubting it and people were suspicious about the whole thing. But this happened with Ozzy too. Ozzy, sometimes you think, oh, Ozzy can't sing, he's not singing well and stuff. But these singers, it really, if you aren't hearing properly, like when singers complain about their in-ear monitor not working and stuff, when you can't hear yourself, it's really a bad situation. So it's a combination of things with him. Obviously, he is an older guy and he's been screaming his head off, so he's going to have some vocal problems. But it really was a hearing problem more than anything. And I remember actually seeing one of those last shows. They played this strange show where they returned to the same place they had their historic Toronto Rocks concert, 400,000 people, right, at that thing. But they came back and played the same decommissioned military base just northwest of Toronto here, and had an outdoor show. And I think it was kind of cold out. It might have been fall or something, but they could have fit as many people as they would have wanted, and they got 40,000. 40,000 is a weird number. It just felt like a strange number for a concert. It's not 70,000. It's not 80,000, which you hear about. It's not the hockey arena size, which is always 18,000, right? If it's full, it's just a weird thing. 40,000 people at a concert. Anyways, Brian didn't sound that great that night, and it was an outdoor show, and like I say, it was a little cold and stuff. But and now we're hearing rumors. Are they back? I don't know. I mean, isn't there that one crazy film or that crazy rock festival lineup that has AC/DC as part of the bill?
Oh yes,
Tool, Metallica, Ozzy, Guns N' Roses, Iron Maiden.
Are they part of that one? Yeah,
their name's on it, right? Ozzy's name is on it.
Yeah, I know. Like they're saying Ozzy's going to come out in a wheelchair. I mean, and they're not even joking about that. I don't know, but yeah, I would love to see it. It's a miracle that that Brian got his hearing back. He found some doctors that had some just extremely rare approach or something where big complicated technological thing that Brian was even in on the testing of this whole thing to get this whole thing going. He's talked at length about how this all worked to get his hearing back. But I frankly don't care if they come back alive or not. I mean, to me, these heritage bands, I just want them to make a bunch more records. That's the most important thing to me. I don't care about them coming back and struggling live and all that stuff. And I don't need to hear the hits again. I just wish more of them would have the attitude that the clock's running out. Let's write some songs. Let's put out some records. Even if it's just one song at a time. Yeah, absolutely. And how could you not include Axl Rose stepping in for Brian on that tour? 23 dates that he played with the band. Milestone number 48. Were you a fan of that choice, number one, and how do you think he did? Wow, yeah, that was an interesting thing. So, A, I'm not a fan of the choice at all, and I'll explain. B, he did amazing. He was great. And he's great with Guns N' Roses now too. So yeah, I've my estimation of that guy has gone up a lot over the years. I think he's doing an incredible job, and he did a good job there. But as a choice, it's just he's too big. His legend is too big. He's too American. He doesn't look like them. He's not the same height as them. And he's not from any of the worlds they're from. He's not Scottish. He's not from London. He's not from the Netherlands. He's not from Australia. He's not even from the East Coast of America. He's from the West Coast of it. Well, I guess he's a transplanted California guy or whatever, but just everything about it seemed, kind of commercial and corporate and lurid and too big. I just loved the idea of, like, to me, I love the idea of a Stevie Young being in there, or a Simon Wright getting into the band, or a Brian Johnson getting into the band. Like, do that again. Get somebody that deep music fans would know about, but nobody else would know about, kind of thing. I think that would have been kind of a better choice. It just seemed like a duet. It seemed like two big acts on stage together doing a duet. And I hate those duet things, whether they're pop, whether they're metal, whatever. Those things, it felt like something
that takes place at the Grammys, right? Just a one-off duet, for a Grammy performance. So yeah, I just think he was just too big a guy for it, but it made for amazing rock and roll because he did a great job. But again, and also on this idea of get somebody in where it seems plausible that he could be the new AC/DC lead singer. So it would have been nice going to those shows thinking, well, if Brian never comes back, this guy fits right in and he's the new guy, right?
He did try to step back purposely on stage as to not get too much attention, but like you see, you can't not notice him. It's Axl.
Yeah. I would my dream guy to join that band would have been Mark Starace from Crocus. He would have been perfect, right? Just to see him come in, just all that history and having the same kind of voice, looking like those guys. He literally looks like a cross between Brian Johnson and Bon Scott, in a way, right? At least the face on him. But yeah, and unfortunately we lost Dan McCafferty recently. That would have not happened. But
Nazareth.
Back in the old days, it would have been interesting to have Dan McCafferty be in that band, right?
Right. That's the Nazareth singer, right? We're talking.
Yeah, he would have been a great choice too. He's Scottish for God's sakes, right? I mean, those guys they're essentially Scottish before, right? So you would have gotten a Scot in with his amazing voice, this great history, an older band than AC/DC. So he would have been a great choice as well. But like I say, I guess the finer point on it would be neat to be watching AC/DC with a new lead singer thinking that guy could be AC/DC's new singer.
We should mention George Young, too. He's the other who passed away along with Malcolm. And George produced all of those early AC/DC albums right up until they did Highway to Hell with Mutt Lange. He and Harry Vanda did all those early AC/DC albums. Mm-hmm. And he passed away. And time again, AC/DC moves forward in the face of tragedy. We get to moment number 50. And it's the return of AC/DC with Power Up. And you say it in the book, this represents a comeback from a near shambles of a situation. How the hell does AC/DC manage to return? Were you surprised by this?
Definitely, I was surprised. But I've always been one to say it really can't be that hard to get AC/DC albums out. I mean, I know they work really hard on it and it's special and it's this band, but I think we all know one of the dirty secrets is that probably any metalhead band from the 80s or late 70s or 90s or a Dave Grohl or whatever, anybody could sit down, even to make it worse, song doctors could sit down. Anybody could Frankenstein together AC/DC records. So I don't think losing Malcolm as a writer is any impediment to this band going. The big impediment with all of our heritage acts going on is when you don't have the lead singer. That's the most important thing. So without Brian Johnson as that stamp there, it's not there. But the amazing thing about AC/DC is that all these parts are there. Phil could be there. Phil Rudd could be there. Cliff could be there. Brian Johnson could be there. Angus is there. Stevie can be there. So it's amazing that this band has enough of the parts to be a credible, and not a band with a super compromised lineup, and they could continue on. But there are limits to the human body, and Brian Johnson, all of our favorite heritage acts, the limits are those aging vocal cords on that one guy that has to be there.
What do you think is next? A tour?
Yeah, sounds like it. But again, I just wonder why these bands work so hard at the hardest, most pain in the butt part of the job, and the part that's going to lose them their reputation, i.e. touring. I don't see why they don't shift over to making records and just stick at making records kind of thing. So yeah, they might tour, but the funny thing is it's the most amount of effort for the least amount of legacy. So a few more gigs happen, big deal kind of thing. I more than anything, I would love to see them make another record.
Well, here's, I just quickly Googled AC/DC news. New York Post headline, is AC/DC performing live in 2023? Here's what we know. And that festival is called Power Trip. That's the one you were talking about. Yeah. That could be a name of another AC/DC album. That could be the sequel to Power Up. Yeah, Metallica, Iron Maiden, Ozzy, Tool. They posted cryptic teasers on Instagram promoting a new festival that goes by that name. Then AC/DC entered the chat, suggesting they'll also be there. So that would be Brian's return to the band on stage. Martin, thanks so much. As always, pleasure. And the book is out now. It is AC/DC at 50. I'm sure you've got plenty of other books coming soon. I am on your email list, so people can go to your website to get all the latest updates.
Absolutely. martinpopoff.com. I sign them, ship them out of here. Anything that's in print, I have. There's PayPal buttons for Canada, International, America. And ACDC at 50. Got lots of copies.
And the podcast's still going strong. I just listened to your last episode, and you had my man David Lee.
Why Go Solo? Yeah.
Why Go Solo?
3 and 5 songs with Martin Popoff audio podcast, up to 197 episodes now.
All right, Martin, thanks so much, man. As always, great to have you here.
Very cool. Thank you, Eric.
That's it. It's in the books.